If there is one thing that I absolutely cannot understand, it is the love for Tokyo Revengers. It's not particularly bad, to be honest, but I don't think it's particularly good either. Honestly, a lot of it is just a bunch of minor gripes that sort of dogpile onto you across the entire thing. Well, up until a certain point. And yes, this video is going to contain spoilers for the entirety of Tokyo Revengers. So if you don't want that, get out of here now. I recently finished reading Tokyo Revengers after spending about $300 to complete this thing. And after that ending, boy am I glad I did not add this to my physical copy collection. So yeah, after reading through every omnibus volume, I walked away from this series with a sense of dissatisfaction. Normally, when you complete a good story, you walk away with that sense of like bittersweet joy at finally getting to the end and regret that you don't have any more. Tokyo Revengers doesn't give that to me. I walked away from it with zero satisfaction. My experience with Tokyo Revengers has been 31 volumes of a very mid manga, culminating in the most disappointing ending I have ever had the displeasure of reaching. And well, yes, it was the ending that ultimately was the most frustrating part of this series. There is a slew of other minor problems that add up and drag this whole series down. And now, just so this doesn't turn into another complete rag session on Tokyo Revengers, I will say that overall, there were a handful of things I did really like about it that kept me reading. I mean, right off the bat, if anything, Draken and Teta Kisaki, the primary villain for the series, were both really good, memorable characters. Draken fits into that place where he's intimidating and tough, but still really likable as a character. He fits both the role of this awesome badass and being a really good supportive friend for Takemichi Hanagaki, as well as for Mikey. And Kisaki stands out as a villain. He's ruthless and manipulative, which is good, especially when you have a series that is largely composed of characters in the same area of the moral spectrum. He also doesn't adhere to the same standard that gets repeated throughout every arc in the series, where might makes right. Kisaki is more of the brains, not the brawn type. And it really sets him apart because you get to see how he uses his skills and intellect for evil. There's also some really good, hard-hitting emotional scenes in this series that I personally love. A good example of this kind of thing would be like the deaths of Emma Sano and Draken. They were effective, sensational, and they hit you hard right when it needed to. Unfortunately, even the strongest moments for Tokyo Revengers aren't enough to carry the rest of the series. There's too much in here that just bogs it down for any of that stuff to really make up for it. So let's just start with the basics. I feel like Tokyo Revengers lacks any sort of depth. It's a shallow story. What I mean by that is it kind of lacks any sort of strong moral messaging or theme. You can argue that you can find the meaning in friendship and never giving up, but that's basically just Naruto, Black Clover, every shonen battler in history. It's fine. Not every series needs some sort of deep moral meaning to it in order to be great. I don't think Demon Slayer has some huge moral background to it. It's a story about a guy trying to get revenge for someone slaughtering his family. But having that sort of underlying meaning to your work, much in the way that Re:Zero, Berserk, and Attack on Titan do, helps add another level of depth that people can get attached to the series. When there's meaning to what's being done, what's being said, and the choices that are being made, it ends up being a whole lot more impactful. The writing of Tokyo Revengers is as follows. Guy gets a second chance at his life via time travel and decides to use it to save his friends from the clutches of a powerful criminal organization and save his middle school girlfriend from getting murked by said organization. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I actually think it's a noble quest to put your life on the line for someone you care about. You know, no greater love hath a man than to lay down his life for his brother. But again, there's nothing really being said in the grand scheme of things. It's just saying, don't give up, keep trying, and save your friends if you have the chance. The lack of a moral underpinning robs Tokyo Revengers of any large-scale lasting impact. And the writing aspect of it is compounded by the bad choice to never tempt Takemichi with the chance to better himself at the expenses of others. Never once is he tempted to use his knowledge of history to cheat his way up the ladder of life. He never has to struggle with the ethics of his powers. He never has to face negative consequences for seemingly inconsequential choices that he made selfishly. And he doesn't have to come face to face with the reality of his poor choices in the past, especially the ones that turn him into a loser in the present. Tack on the fact that Takemichi's entire character arc happens within the first arc of the story, and therefore has no build-up and no time for you to recognize his flaws and see how he can improve. And you have a story that overall is just kind of meh. So while, yes, the fact that he uses his powers so nobly the whole time is something that you can point to as a good quality of his. But from a writing standpoint, the fact that he's never once tempted to use it to make his life better, to cheat, to exploit everything he knows is going to happen, means that he just ends up kind of being a Boy Scout of all things. There's really no chance for you to develop an emotional connection with him, because by the time you're even aware of what's going on, he's already decided to do a whole 180 on his entire character, and that's it. Again, this immediate reversal in his character lacks any impact because it happens far too quick, and things going quickly ends up being a bit of a problem at the very end, and we'll get to that in a bit. Back to the writing aspect, though, there are ways to overcome your story not being based on some underpinning moral or a great message you have to give. If your work is so fantastic, so well crafted that people want to stick with it because they're enthralled just by the story alone, you bypass the need for any sort of meaning or applicability in the story. People develop that emotional connection with the things happening, with the characters, and that happens when you create good narratives. The issue is Tokyo Revengers, again, as I highlighted earlier, doesn't have that. Its structure is pretty rough and unrefined. It's stereotypical of its genre in some of the worst ways possible, and is very shallow. So the fact that it's sort of like mid-level craftsmanship doesn't help, especially when you have no moral underpinning to keep people attached to the characters. So continuing along with the subject of bad design choices, Tokyo Revengers is very stereotypical of the shonen battle genre. The theme of this whole thing isn't that Tokyo Revengers has a bunch of exceptionally bad things wrong with it. It's just that it falls into a lot of the same pitfalls and doesn't recover. In this case, it follows the usual shonen style of introduce villain. Villain is bad. Hero has to fight villain. Villain is defeated. Introduce bigger, badder villain. You repeat this process as many times as you can possibly get away with it, and then you conclude your series with an epic final battle. You see, this is a tried and true formula. It's what every shonen battle series does. Dragon Ball, Naruto, Bleach, One Piece, Black Clover, Fairy Tail, they all use that formula. In fact, that's actually a pretty standard writing practice, isn't it? But with these ones, it's kind of different. It's never really about anything other than power. You have characters who get more powerful every time. And that's the issue, is now the hero has to get more powerful again. And now he's at a new power level, so you introduce an even more powerful villain up here, and the hero now has to rise to that level to beat him. The thing is, with all of these other shonen series, they have some sort of massive story behind them, a moral that underpins those sections of the story, or just a straight up fucking hype train to drive everything forward. Where this becomes a problem is with Tokyo Revengers' lack of powers, meaning that villains basically just become bigger, more evil versions of the last guy, like going from Cell to Cell Max. And rather than feeling like you're progressing through a story, you feel like you're just retreading the same ground over and over and over again, because it's really all the author knows how to do. And Tokyo Revenger's story in this sense is just an endless progression towards an unreachable goal. You never really feel like you're getting anywhere. That object is always way off in the distance where you can't reach it, never any closer, and you feel like you're taking the same steps over and over again. A Tokyo Revengers villain is just some evil gang leader who kills people. Okay, boot him out? No, an even stronger evil gang leader with more gangsters who kills people. With other series, there's usually something else to drive the tension, the story, make it feel like you're actually going somewhere. Tokyo Revengers keeps posting the same goal and telling you, do it again. In the manga, it made fights feel more like just kind of a matter-of-fact event, rather than some big, hyped up event that concludes a story arc. And in the anime, the issue is that the animation isn't particularly enthralling. So there's really no payoff to slogging through a bunch of episodes of Takemichi being annoying as hell, only to watch some freeze frames of a bunch of gangsters punching each other and then mediocre animation at best. So yeah, the revolving door of copy-clone villains just doesn't help the series whatsoever. And the villain problem is part of a much larger problem in the series of all the characters kind of feeling like they're the same person. Delinquent A and Delinquent B can really only be distinguished by their looks and the fact that one of them likes to sew. So aside from Draken and Kiseki, I found a lot of these characters The ones who actually had decent backstories weren't utilized nearly enough for me to even give a flip about them. And the ones who were used a ton didn't really have all that compelling of character arcs or backstories. Sometimes characters even felt more like gimmicks than proper parts of the story. And then, of course, there's Takemichi, who's only really remembered because he's shoved in your face as the main character, even though he feels and acts like a side character in his own story. Takemichi rarely resolves a fight on his own. He usually just acts as a catalyst, and everyone else does all the fighting and wins the important battles. Acting as the catalyst as he does isn't inherently the problem. There are other series that I actually enjoyed that use their main character in the same way. Again, one of my favorite shows is one that's, you can take it or leave it, Re:Zero. And it does the exact same thing with its main character. But because Takemichi finds himself being used as a punching bag so much, and never really even gets his own big wins by finishing off a villain or anything, it's hard to consider him fit for the role. Because it's almost like he never does anything other than tell someone, hey, thing is gonna happen. So yeah, the largely homogenous cast and the revolving door of copy-clone villains had me feeling like this series was just dragging on past its due date. Which brings me straight to my single biggest gripe about Tokyo Revengers. The fact that it actually does drag on past its due date. I've started to call this the Boruto effect, and it's basically where an author decides to try and write too long of a series and ends up ruining every character and emotional beat he had going. Honestly, the entire final arc of Tokyo Revengers is one that I genuinely feel needs to be cut from the entire series. So this whole thing starts with them baiting you with a fake ending. It's very cathartic. It's kind of a bittersweet ending. Takemichi has finally saved everyone, and Toman is no longer the massive criminal organization it was going to become. You get introduced to the happy futures of everyone who was once involved in Toman, and you get to look at how all this tragedy and loss that they suffered affected them, and it kind of feels good to watch them still enjoy their lives in spite of the things they lost. It would have been a good place to end it. Not the perfect ending Takemichi was trying to fight for, but one that was hard fought and well deserved. So yeah, by this point, Tokyo Revengers should have ended. The story was over. Kiseki's dead, Toman is disbanded, and Takemichi and Hina are getting married. But with the wedding date drawing near, Takemichi realizes something isn't quite right. He hasn't seen Mikey around. Now Draken spins this lie that Mikey is traveling the world in remembrance of his dead sister, but the truth is, Mikey's going off the deep end. He's still involved in the underworld. And as it turns out, that leaves him in a very dark, depressed, and violent state of mind. So, as a result, Takemichi isn't satisfied with this and decides to bail on this what would have been a very cathartic and bittersweet ending because he has to save Mikey. And while yes, this is very much in character for Takemichi, it still ruins the story. So Takemichi travels back to the past and teams up with past Draken to join up with another gang and try and stop Mikey from getting involved in the underworld. And unfortunately, that gets Draken shot and killed. But not before Takemichi miraculously develops the ability to see the future out of thin fucking air. Why? Because you know the final showdown has to be Takemichi versus Mikey. And the only way that this fucking pussy is going to stand a chance against a martial arts trained Mikey is if he has some sort of cheat ability. So shit keeps sliding downhill, things go sideways, and now we're getting into the final battle, and Takemichi has rebuilt Toman for one last fight, one last hurrah, to take on Mikey's new fully criminal organization. And halfway through this final battle, Mikey decides to reveal the fact that, hey, you know my dead big brother Shinichiro? Yeah, he was a time leaper just like you. And it goes so far in the manga as to show you that it was Shinichiro who gave Takemichi that ability to begin with. But in the act of trying to acquire that power, Shinichiro inflicted some unknown consequences. He literally cursed his younger brother with a violent supernatural impulse to kill and hurt people. So yeah, you know that violent dark impulse Mikey talks about? That insane rage bottled up inside him? It wasn't the result of his childhood trauma and loss. It was a supernatural power that forced him to do it. Seriously. Really? So now you've removed any sort of nuance or compelling development from Mikey, since all of his evils were beyond his control. Back on track, Toman kind of gets their ass handed to him, and it's just down to Takemichi who is fighting Mikey. Takemichi, using the power of belief and suddenly magically getting stronger, and his Deus Ex see the future powers, is just barely holding his own against a martially trained Mike. And everyone in Toman gasps as they watch, like, this guy can actually fight? No, he's just enabled God mode for a short period of time and can barely manage to keep up with someone. And, well, Mikey gets sick of it really quick and gets smart. He grabs a sword and rushes Takemichi. And what does Takemichi do? He lets himself get stabbed. On the verge of joining the Donut Gang, Takemichi starts to cry, and Mikey snaps out of his supernaturally inflicted rage delusion and cries too. And then they both leap into the past together, where they were in grade school, and Takemichi rushes to meet up with Mikey in the past. And now we reach the final chapter of Tokyo Revengers, which basically involves Ken Wakui blitzkrieging an entire arc of the series that makes everything that happened completely irrelevant as Takemichi and Mikey go on and recruit every evil person they beat all the way up until this point into Toman, turn them into good guys, and take over Tokyo. In one chapter, mind you. So yeah, using this double time leap thing they did, they bring everyone back from the dead. Shinichiro, Emma, Draken, all of the dead villains like Kisaki. It's worse than the Dragon Balls. All the bittersweet farewells, the great emotional beats up to this point, and all of the struggles get taken out behind the barn and put down like the sick old dog they are. It took roughly 3 chapters for an author to destroy the entirety of all the good emotional beats he had established in the series. Any consequence, loss, or lasting impact the series has is obliterated. And it was so frustrating, I nearly pitched my phone at the wall in frustration. I genuinely would have been okay with the series if it had just ended before the final arc. If they hadn't tried to bait us with this last thing and go for that perfect 100% run ending. But, and if you've read Ken Wakui's other manga, Desert Eagle, you would know this, the man struggles with concluding a series. Both Desert Eagle and Tokyo Revengers have awful rushed endings, in my opinion. The issue with Tokyo Revengers, though, where Desert Eagle doesn't struggle, is that Tokyo Revengers ending destroys all the good things that were going for it. The emotional beats, the cathartic farewell at the end. Yeah, Tokyo Revengers will go down as an anime that I refuse to ever watch any more of. I watched like 17 episodes of the first season, dropped it. Started reading the manga. Alright, it's okay, interesting enough for me to keep reading it. And the manga will go down as one of the most disappointing endings I have ever experienced. The moral of the story is, don't Deus Ex some powers in for your character, and then speed run to the end of your series and write a final chapter that totally negates all of the emotion built up in the story to that point. But other than that ending, Tokyo Revengers is just kind of mid, I guess. It's alright. I'm not going to judge someone for liking it. I just can't comprehend it myself. I don't find it all that entertaining. Yeah, Tokyo Revengers is not something I would recommend. The only thing I would recommend about it is that you avoid it at all costs. The ending was far too contrived, depriving the story of any emotional weight. And the trudge to get through it wasn't even all that satisfying in the slightest. But hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, leave a comment, maybe share the video. Other than that, see you in the next one, I guess. Bye.